Hi, Algebra, we're ready for our next lecture on factoring. So your book takes factoring really slowly. In the past, I've taught factoring much more quickly, and this is one of the sections that we would have combined with another section. So in this section, we're going to factor more quadratic trinomials. Those are polynomials that have 3 terms where the degree is 2, or the highest power on the variable is a squared power. So in this section, we're going to look at quadratic trinomials that have the 3rd term as negative. So before, the constant, meaning just the number by itself with no variables on it, it was always positive in the ones we were trying to factor. And so now it's going to be negative. So before we factored things like x squared plus 8x plus 15. And sometimes we also factored terms where the middle term was negative, but we always ended up with either 2 positives or 2 negatives for the signs inside the parentheses of the factored form. So now we're going to look at an example like x squared plus 3x minus 28. So what we have to find is 2 factors of negative 28. That means 2 numbers that multiply to give you negative 28 that add up to positive 3. So I really like to do these t-charts, and so that's what I'm going to do here. And I'm going to list factors of 28. So we have 7 and 4. And you can probably pretty easily see how you can get positive 3 from 7 and 4. But we're going to look at all the possibilities just so you understand. So like, what if we had negative 7 and 4? What if we had positive 7 and negative 4? Because when we multiply them, we want it to be negative 28. And we'll look at the other possibilities just so you understand what other ones you should look at. So we could have 1 and negative 28. We could have negative 1 and positive 28. And then there are 2 more numbers that multiply to give you 28, 2 and 14. So we could have 2 and 14, and we could have negative 2 and, 2 and negative 14 and negative 2 and 14. So those are all the pairs. And you probably have already figured out that 7 and negative 4, those 2 add up to give you a positive 3. So when we actually factor that, it looks like x plus 7, since the 7 was positive, and x minus 4. And that would be the factored form. Okay, a couple of things. When you make this t-chart, like I listed all of the possibilities, you do not need to list all the possibilities. Basically, I list them until I find what I need. And as you get even better at factoring, you can just do the figuring out in your head and just figure this out without even doing the t-chart. So, use the t-chart as you need it. And I can't remember if I told you why I called it a t-chart, but hopefully you see that there's a big T in the middle. Okay, so don't forget that you can check your answers by multiplying the binomials back together again. So you can take the first terms times each other and FOIL. X times x is x squared. Outer terms, x times a minus 4 is a minus 4x. Inner terms, 7 times x is positive 7x. And last term, 7 times negative 4 is negative 28. And so then if we combine these 2 like terms, we would get x squared plus 3x minus 28. Okay. Now let's try an example. Factor x squared plus 3x minus 10. So again, I'll start with a t-chart, and I want to get 2 factors that multiply to give me negative 10 that add to give me positive 3. So this is the add to, is the linear term with the x on it. And this is the multiply to, and you always want to take the sign with it. Okay, so negative 10. So there aren't too many factors of 10. We have 5 and 2, or 1 and 10. So I'm starting to see these really easily, that 5 and 2, if I subtract those, I would get a positive 3. Now I need to know where to put the negative sign. One of them has to be negative, one of them has to be positive. If I put a negative on the 2, then I would have 5 plus negative 2 is 3, and that's exactly what I want. So my answer would be x plus 5 times x minus 2. And then, of course, again, we can check our answer by FOILing back out these binomials. Okay, so what if the middle term is negative and the last term is also negative? Can we do that? So we want two numbers that multiply to negative 10. So multiply to negative 10. This time they're going to add to negative 3. And again, you want to take the sign that's right next to the number with it. So 5 and 2, when we subtracted them, we got a positive 3. What if we made 5 negative and 2 positive? We would get a negative 3 when we added those together. So our factored form would be x minus 5 times x plus 2. Okay, moving on. So I want to give you an example of how to do these in your head, and then you don't need to do them in your head yet, but if you're starting to really get the hang of it, you want to be able to see the question, write the answer. So we have factor x squared plus x minus 20. So I'm going to go ahead and write my two sets of parentheses. I want to get x squared, so I know I'm going to have x and x in the first slots. Now, the two numbers that multiply to give me negative 20 that add to give me positive 1 would be 5 and negative 4. And then I have my answer. So that's doing it the fast way. If you want to do it the slower way, if you're still getting used to this, you're going to start with negative 20. What multiplies to give you negative 20 that adds to give you a positive 1? So when there's no number in front of the x, it's an understood 1 because 1 times x is just x. So we can look at different pairs. We could look at 10 and 2. 10 times 2 is 20. 1 and 20. 1 times 20 is 20. And then, of course, we have 5 times 4. And if we have a positive 5 and a negative 4, we get a positive 1 when we add them together. So our answer would be x plus 5 times x minus 4. X squared minus 8x minus 20. So I'll start with the t-chart for negative 20. So this time if you try to do 5 and 4, either way you do 5 and 4, whether you do 5 and negative 4 or negative 5 and positive 4, you're not going to get this negative 8 that you want to add to. So we're going to have to go to other factors of 20 like 10 and 2. So if we put a negative on the 2 and a positive on the 10, we're going to get a positive 8, and we need to get a negative 8. So I'm going to look at negative 10 and positive 2, and those will add to give me negative 8. So therefore my answer is x minus 10 times x plus 2. And let's do a checking of our answer just to be sure. So x times x, first terms, x squared. And then I want to do the outer terms next. X times 2, we write that as 2x. Inner terms, negative 10 times x is negative 10x. And last terms, negative 10 times 2 is negative 20. So we get x squared minus 8x minus 20. So since that matches the question, x squared minus 8x minus 20, I'm going to go ahead and box my answer, even though it has a bunch of arrows, because that's the right answer. Okay, let's do x squared minus 9x minus 20. So I'll start with minus 20. Okay, so I'm going to look at 5 and 4. Well, I want to multiply to get a negative 20. So negative 5 and positive 4 multiply to that, but when I add them, I get negative 1. 5 and negative 4, I would get positive 1. Now, if I could do negative 5 and negative 4, that gives me negative 9. But those don't multiply to give me negative 20. That would multiply to give me positive 20. So we can't even use that one. So say we look at negative 10 and 2, we get negative 8. Positive 10, negative 2, we get positive 8. 1 and 20, we have to make one of them negative. This would give us negative 19. Negative 1 and positive 20 would give us positive 19. Now, if I have exhausted the list of all of the factors of 20, I've done all the possible combinations, and I don't get the correct answer, that means that we can't factor this quadratic trinomial. And when you can't factor a quadratic trinomial, what you write as your answer is that it's prime. And this is just like when we say that like the number 13 is prime. The only factors of 13 are 1 and 13. And so this trinomial is prime because the only factors of it are 1 and itself. It's the same idea. And that's it. We did it.